Mark Walsh, Head of Development at Financial. Welcome to the studio. Welcome to the podcast. Again, another local, so I'm not going to say welcome to Liverpool because, wouldn't make sense.
I could say it to you.
Yeah. Go on then, say it.
Welcome to Liverpool.
Thank you very much. Again, taken off your LinkedIn profile, you're a Liverpool-based technical lead / manager / architect with over 14 years of industry experience, spanning multiple companies, including LateRooms, Yodel, LivingLens and Medallia,
yeah.
And obviously head of development at Financial. Now they're everywhere on LinkedIn, Financial. But I noticed you posted or commented recently the following, and I wanted to see the thoughts behind that.
I'm excited.
I think it was someone talking about, I can't actually remember, but it'll come back to me. But you recently commented, devs, QA and product all need to be there at the inception of the idea and onwards. Putting people in boxes limits their output, like being trapped in a box.
Yeah.
Can you remember what triggered that comment?
Yeah, I mean, what's triggered that comment is probably my experience working in various companies where I'm put in a box or seen other people put in boxes. But it's mostly around product mindset. My belief is as many people involved within the kind of the inception of an idea, the better, and you get different kind of viewpoints. So I think in that example, QA was mentioned.
Yeah.
You kind of get how are we going to test this product? In terms of dev, like how are we going to scale it?
Yeah.
Obviously, when you've got product people in there, you've got the kind of product-y questions that they would ask, like how are we going to sell it? Who are we going to market this feature at? I think when you have kind of siloed departments in businesses, what you get is very fragmented products because everyone's interpretation of an idea is different. People's concerns are different. But when you have all those concerns in at the inception, that's when you can really start. Sorry, just touch the mic. That's when you can really start to kind of get a product that is a little bit more well-rounded, or an idea that is a lot more well-rounded than if you kind of pass from department to department. Probably the worst examples I've worked in companies like this and seen a lot of companies who do this is where they'll have like very strict kind of borders between departments, like kind of product only really talk to other people in product.
Yeah.
Developers only ever speak to developers, and that implants a terrible mindset, in my opinion, that developers should only write code, testers should only care about testing things. Whereas I think if you get people in the room all together, you've basically, those borders are removed, and you've got a better product at the end of it. You actually also start to see other people's concerns, and that starts to impact your mindset. So it really happened for me. This really happened when I joined a startup, because you don't have those borders. Like the amount of hats that you wear in a startup, you can't just say I'm a developer or I write code, because someone's going to force a different hat on you. It just happens. So quite a lot of kind of my T-shaped nature and the top of the hat T bit comes from exposure to things like product, sales, even support, from working in a startup. And I think even if you're a massive company, there's no real excuse not to have those kind of people represented at the inception of an idea.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned the startup. Specific, was this the one that you worked in and then got bought out? And what was that? Can you, what was your, were you a CTO there? What was your journey there, sort of thing?
An interesting journey, I'd say. I joined as a mid-level developer, and kind of rose to be a senior.
Okay.
Senior, I don't really like titles like this, because you can meet a senior who's got 10 years experience who isn't really that senior, and you can meet a junior who's a fantastic developer, but they've only got 2 years experience. It all depends on what you do. But yeah, so from mid-level to senior, and we did have a technical lead who left, and then I kind of took up that mantle, and then we were eventually acquired by Medallia, which was an incredibly scary experience, and one that I really do want to repeat again. Yeah. But along that journey was, I think when I joined LivingLens, I only cared about code. I just want to write code. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do support. Mm-hmm. Don't want to do it like anything that isn't tech. Just, cut me and I bleed tech.
Yeah.
But you can't do that. You have to wear multiple hats if you want to be successful. I think the most successful startups consist of people who are wearing, I don't know, at least 5 hats.
Yeah.
Probably not simultaneously, but are prepared to switch caps at a moment's notice. So all of that kind of T-shaped nature came from there. So that was around things like QA. I mean, the dev team in LivingLens used to do manual QA. We were the QA department. We couldn't afford a QA department. We used to talk directly to sales, directly to customers. It was really interesting and varied work, which was honestly really quite painful at the start, but it becomes far less painful, and it rounds you off as what I would describe as a product engineer.
Yeah.
And
that's
I think
an interesting term. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's where the industry's going, particularly with AI and stuff like that. I think you're going to see an emergence of T-shaped engineers. I think the kind of code in a box type of engineers I think they'll always be there in some capacity, depending on the company. But I think the majority of companies will kind of expect you to be more T-shaped, not just from a technical point of view, but also kind of soft skills and being able to talk to sales, being able to talk to support, being able to do various roles within, kind of doing supplementary things alongside development. So yeah.
Do you prefer the startup culture rather than big corporates? Then is it fair to say?
Yes, because I feel like big corps try and box you in. I've never worked I suppose Medallia was a huge company. I wasn't necessarily boxed in Medallia, I'd say. I was still exposed to a lot, but I left after about a year working at Medallia, and we were still kind of being onboarded into Medallia, if that kind of makes sense.
So a year after you got acquired?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were still integrating with their systems. And so there was still an element of me wearing multiple hats, but the hats were being taken off me. Yeah. I keep doing a hat analogy.
Right. It makes sense. I think it's digestible.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. So now, I mean, I've put what does a CTO do on here, but do you consider yourself a CTO or what? I'm trying to make this pod. I'll be cards on the table. You're the most technical person I've had on here, so I'm really intrigued and interested to know your thoughts on certain things. But at the same time, I want someone who doesn't know our language, your language, to be able to digest it. So, do you consider yourself a chief technology officer, CTO, or the title of head of development? And what is the difference, I suppose?
Yeah, I think titles are titles, aren't they? Yeah. So it really is dependent on where you work, essentially. So I am the most senior technical person in the company. So that's usually what I kind of market myself as, regardless of my title.
Yeah,
I'm de facto head of development anyway.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is with the role in financial is, it is completely different from kind of a stereotypical scale-up CTO or even a huge multinational CTO. I am very hands-on. I'm involved in pretty much everything across the business, apart from kind of content, essentially. Although I'm a facilitator of content. So I'm touching everything in the business. I'm also touching on a day-to-day basis kind of code, looking after the platform, making sure that things are running smoothly. In kind of bigger companies, the CTO is far less removed from the kind of nitty-gritties of day-to-day kind of developing features and maintenance. They're kind of more, kind of more geared towards strategic thinking, kind of, I don't really particularly like the term, but capacity planning, making sure that the goals of the company more aligned with, the people they've got within the company, and making sure that they're achievable. Whereas it's a lot, for me, in my current role, it's a lot more low level. I'm still doing a lot of technical work on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I suppose those are the kind of key differences.
And the question that I have been dying to ask you is, as a CTO, what are your thoughts on Agile? And specifically, people who may not be as technically minded coming into an organization and trying to, some would say tell, some would say facilitate, some would say influence the devs team's way of working. What are your thoughts on that? As someone, and I've been looking forward to asking you that, because I don't think there's enough. I've had loads of Agile coaches on here, and they're obviously going to say their point of view and how good they are and their mistakes they've made. But I want to hear it from like a proper developer, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got strong beliefs weakly held.
Yeah.
So, and particularly around Agile, I don't really believe in a one size fits all. And I think a lot of that is peddled in this industry, in terms of, this is the Scrum guide, you must do all of these things because the Scrum guide says so.
Yeah.
I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that for Kanban either.
Yeah.
Or any other kind of, Scrum methodology, I suppose, or any flavor. People like their flavors of Agile, don't they?
Yeah.
So I, from a technical point of view, and coming at it from kind of the challenges that technical people face around things like refactoring code, which is always and technical debt, which is always two big things that don't really ever seem to kind of fit into, delivery roadmaps or roadmaps in general. I always think, from an Agile perspective, you should just do what makes sense for you as a team. I think that you can use Scrum as an initial guide. I think it's perfectly fine to remove bits that aren't relevant to you, or combine them, or change them. And ultimately, the only thing that really matters is delivering software as quickly as possible to your users.
Yeah.
That is it. And that is just the hard and fast rule. And whatever you need to do to get to that, do that, or don't do that in some cases.
Yeah.
Perfect example. I've worked in a company before who will remain nameless.
Yeah.
Who prescribed an exact Scrum methodology down to, this is how long these meetings should last. Why? Is my only question. Why can't a meeting, if you're getting value from it as a team, if your planning takes 20 minutes or it takes an hour, so what?
Yeah.
If you need to do that stuff, you need to do that stuff. That was what I would describe as not a way to do Agile. In that very definition, it's rigid. And I understand that as training wheels for teams who don't work in an Agile way, but I don't understand that as a Agile methodology. It's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it even a term, like, again, in your current role or other startups you've been, or scale ups, is it a term that's even, like, for the people that are actually building new, innovative stuff like you are at your current place? Mm-hmm. Is Agile even on the table, or is it just, let's just get some good shit out there? Like, is it like, are we making more of it than it needs to be?
I think I think if you're doing Scrum by the book in a startup, I don't see how much value you'd really get from that. Yeah. But yeah, in kind of my current role and in previous startup roles, if you had a Scrum Master come into the business and you ask them, is this Scrum? They'd say no, because it isn't. All I do, especially in my current role now, is take the only real ceremony that is in the Agile Manifesto, which is roughly having a retrospective.
Yeah.
I think you could argue that having a stand up is kind of talking to people on a daily basis within the business, but you need to do that anyway. I take that as a given. I take that as
just common sense.
Yeah, it's common sense. I think the only real ceremony that we do in my current role is a retrospective. Other than that, we're just focused on delivering value to the customer. It's a very small team, so we don't really need to do things like planning and that kind of thing, or refinement even. We just refine when we're doing it because it just makes the most sense.
And from the very high level, your founders are very involved, so I imagine that helps.
Everyone in the business as much as possible. When you're that kind of size, it just makes sense to involve as many people as you can. I think there's a cut-off point there if you had 20 people in the business.
That was going to be my next thing. Is there a tipping point of?
Yeah, I think when it's, and there's no hard science to it, but when it's just a wall of noise and opinion, I think that's when you need to start kind of cutting that back a little bit.
Yeah.
I think at the time when I worked in LivingLens that we were required, we had over 20 employees. No. That wouldn't have worked. That would not have worked there. We did actually have a dedicated product. We were a product team, but one of the co-founders in LivingLens, he was COO. So he did a lot of the kind of product-y stuff. This was a kind of pre-product. Yeah. So as a term and as a role, because product is a relatively new role, isn't it? Within the last 10 years?
Yeah.
Ish. And people call themselves BAs before that, presumably. Or a lot of BAs have moved into product.
Yeah. Allegedly.
So, allegedly.
There's a lot of BAs out there calling themselves product owners, but still don't know the product that well.
Yes.
But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, so you just mentioned you've had, I really want this to be a conversation for people not to keep making the same mistakes. So maybe not in the organization you're in now, because that's a bit different. But you mentioned you've had Scrum Masters come in. Like, what can they? Because I've seen a couple of Scrum Masters come in, they've done their 2-day course.
Yeah.
Very little technical, and I'm not the most technical, but I've done the hard work to understand it, and I've learned. My entry was swift because I thought it's relatively easy to understand, and who doesn't have an iPhone?
Yeah,
unless you're an Android. Everyone's got their faults, I suppose. That was a joke. But I've seen a lot of Scrum Masters come in, and they try and do the fluff. Like, what would your advice be as a CTO to? Because sometimes, if the organization's asking for someone like that, delivery manager, Scrum Master, and they've been brought into an organization, they don't know like the ins and outs of it, and sometimes they can go in a bit heavy. Have you got any advice for people like that to get the team on side?
Yeah,
so they don't piss them off by trying to do a stupid retro on day one.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that I see is being a project manager.
Okay, yeah.
So asking people, have you done that yet?
Yeah.
What order are you doing this in? Why are you doing that? Kind of questioning not what they're doing, but how they're doing it. I've came across that kind of, have you done it merchant?
Yeah.
And it's maddening as a technical person because, kind of without going too in depth into it,
go as in depth as you want.
Quite a lot of the time, you do need very, very focused time as a developer. You do need deep focus. You need uninterrupted hours if possible, which is much harder in a startup than it is in a scale up or bigger. But you can achieve that by calendar segmentation and kind of just making sure that people are aware of that. But kind of constantly interrupting people and asking them where they're up to with stuff, that is really going to grate on people. It's also not your role as a Scrum Master or a product owner. So that is the number one mistake that I've encountered. And sometimes it's just over enthusiasm, I think. But
okay. In terms of what does over enthusiasm look like in your mind?
They just want they just want to deliver more. Everything now, for people feel good about delivering stuff, and technical people are no different.
Yeah.
But you've just got to let good chefs cook.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. We'll use that.
Use that one. So yeah, true, great restaurant owners let great chefs cook.
Yeah.
And there's no two ways about that. I don't know. In fact, you see it on Gordon Ramsay, don't you? Kind of, they go into a restaurant, you'll have an owner who's not a chef, and he'll be kind of like saying to the chef, like, "Oh, maybe you should cook this." And
you know who you've made me think about? Because I did a bit of a deep dive into him. And he's never going to listen to this, is he? But Greg Wallace.
Oh yeah,
he's a judge on MasterChef.
Yeah,
but I don't actually think he's
not a chef.
I think he's owned restaurants and stuff, but I don't think he's like would be considered a chef. Yeah. But he's judging on MasterChef. But that's more of an entertainment value thing, isn't it? But it completes the analogy, I suppose. You just to pick on something you said, do you think sometimes there's still like techies in the corner? They hate being spoken to. They're all bloody introverted, and they've got no like. Is that still an issue, or is it an issue? Is it a perspective that maybe shouldn't still be there?
I wouldn't say particularly it's an issue. I think the issue is always around the management of that, because you're always going to get really introverted, quite shy, technical people who are quite closed off, and you're not going to get necessarily people like me who are kind of like, a bit more kind of outgoing and making chef sort of comparisons. But yeah, you will always kind of get people who are particularly really, really technically astute programmers who really would like to just sit there all day in the dark. But you've just got to adapt how you manage those people to get the best out of them.
Yeah.
And hey, everybody's different, and it's it's all about identifying kind of what is their passion, kind of what are they getting out of that, what are the bits that they like, and then you just lean into that as much as you can. I think there's a certain element of not protection, but making sure that they're not pushed into uncomfortable situations. See it all in kind of bigger organizations when, kind of your sprint demo, for example, you will get people who are just wincing at that. They just don't want to do it. I think it's a good thing to do. And I actually think it's a good thing to come out your shell and do things that you're not comfortable with. I'm not particularly that comfortable talking to camera.
Yeah.
But, well, maybe I am. I don't know.
I mean, you're doing all right so far.
But I think it's all about how you manage people. And I think you can give little nudges, but there's a line that you shouldn't cross, with certain people. And it's very nuanced, which is why I'm being really, really quite skirting around the issue a little bit. Because
it's finding tolerance, isn't it? Levels I've always found.
Yeah.
Because there is a bit of give and take. You can't, I don't know, maybe different organizations, different things, but there is going to be some expectation. You're gonna have to talk to me. If I'm the product manager, you're gonna have to come and give me something. I can't force this. If we're in refinement, I want you to talk to me, because if there's a problem, you've got all the ideas. You're building this thing, so I think there's a
minimum.
There's an element of give and take. If you're coming into refinement, you're just going to sit there and say nothing, and then tell me a problem afterwards. We're going to have to work on that.
Yeah,
but I do totally get disturbing them. And have you got 5 minutes? Have you got 5 minutes? Which then it gets them out of the flow. And I'm sure you may be able to correct me, but I'm sure someone cleverer than me takes 20 minutes, 25 minutes for us all to get back in the flow of things once we've been disturbed. And that's where a lot of... Hello folks, sorry to interrupt this video, but if you have got this far, it would really help if you did subscribe to the channel. Because it's face-to-face, it makes convincing people a lot easier to travel up all the way to Liverpool to record in this lovely studio. So, like I said, please subscribe, and thanks for watching. What do you think about open spaces? like from a developer point of view?
I think they're fine if you can control them. So if you've got noise cancelling headphones, I presume you mean an open office.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Or like a cafe and stuff.
Yeah, open offices.
Yeah. Even today, I've worked from a cafe. I've got noise cancelling headphones. It's fine. Flow state is very interesting. I think people should be I think you can interrupt it. I think asynchronously is probably the best thing, unless it's obviously something urgent, and that's you should obviously interrupt someone properly then. But
what do you mean by that? Just for people listening?
Sorry. Asynchronously is kind of a non-disruptive message, maybe on Slack or Teams.
Okay, yeah.
Typically, people will kind of mute that when they know they're about to go into kind of into a flow. The only thing that we didn't actually mention about that is kind of pair programming, which is kind of touches on your previous point about individuals who might not want to kind of collaborate. They don't want to, they don't want to kind of communicate with others as much, and that's where I've seen that also pop up as a problem, and where I've seen flow state become a problem as well is when people can't work with others, and they kind of get siloed off. But yes, sorry, going back to that point.
That's all right.
Don't know how you're going to cut that.
No, we don't need to. It's all part of the same journey.
I think how you interrupt people is very important, and if it can be as least disruptive as possible. I think like having guidelines for this kind of stuff is not mandated rules, but having guidelines of like, this is probably the best way to kind of interact with me. I've done that before. One of the companies I've worked in had a company directory. Amazing idea was, how is it best to contact me? And it was like, oh, just give me a call. A lot of people are kind of, particularly the more salesy people, were like, give me a call. Like, I love being on the phone.
Let's go out for tea.
Yeah. Or some people are like, just drop me a Slack message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And obviously the override is, if there's an emergency, then everyone gets called, because that's the most blocking.
There's like different, I've seen manuals of me where you have like the person, there's an avatar in the middle. Yeah. This is how I like to communicate. These are my working hours. Yeah. I've seen red and green flags in open offices. Yeah. Like red,
nice,
piss off.
Yeah.
Green, come and talk to me.
Yeah.
Working agreements within teams.
Yeah.
But they're only as good as the amount of times people actually look at them. Otherwise, it's an hour with Post-its on the wall, bit happy clappy, and then it gets ignored. It's about reinforcing those things, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
How do you manage the tech, the code side on the bringing people on, like people management side, as a we'll call it CTO for now, because we'll just use one term, as a CTO.
Yeah, I think it's probably good to just use one term, isn't it? Because I'll just spin on multiple titles. So managing the technical part as well as the soft skills, I imagine. Yeah. I try and compartmentalize them as much as possible. Try and keep them as separate as possible. So kind of I'm a big believer in kind of onboarding plans. And I make one if I join a new company, kind of like an onboarding doc, which is, this mostly covers the technical side of things, which is kind of how to get set up, where you'll need licenses from. I think I've done that in the last 4 companies I've worked in, because onboarding is terrible in this industry for technical people, by the way. It's just like you start a new company and someone just goes, I think you need access to Miro, and I think
it takes them a week to do all the builds on the laptop that they can give them.
Exactly. And if you're doing that and going through that pain, document it so no one else has to go through it, or you don't have to rely on someone just remembering it. So, but in terms of actually bringing kind of people on, is
it something you've had to learn yourself, or is it does the people management or the people development side come quite naturally to you?
Development side comes really naturally, because I'm a more technically minded person. The people is a learned experience. obviously I've encountered multiple different types of people kind of within my career, and experienced quite negative people along with really positive people as well. So I think for the kind of softer side of things, and bringing people on and kind of getting people to kind of all go towards a target, that is more about adjusting for different personalities. So when I've done kind of one-to-ones in the past, I might not really be answering your question here, but let's go with this.
No, good tangents to go down.
Yeah. So when I've done one-to-ones, I've geared them towards, like, they're never the same, but they're two different people.
Yeah.
I kind of geared more towards what I know is someone's passions, their interests, and kind of steer away from the negative stuff. So what I've done when I've managed more people than I currently manage, because that would be one document, is actually create documents for each of my line reports in terms of kind of like a profile. And that is how I kind of nurture the softer side of things. And obviously, kind of when I'm onboarding someone brand new, that's where I'll create that kind of profile. And it's not, it sounds a bit weird and suspect, doesn't it? Kind of profiling people.
No, it's like a rolling commentary, isn't it? It's just keeping the receipts of, well, actually last week, or whatever, last week, for example, you said this. How are you feeling about that? Because you've got a lot going on. You're not going to be thinking about one person all the time.
Exactly. And it could be like, Jenny doesn't like public speaking, so maybe we shouldn't push her to do like really technical demos in front of, the entire company. Oh, but Philip likes to do that.
Yeah. Or Jenny might be more comfortable recording it.
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing it.
So that's kind of how I deal with the softer side of things, even though typically it's a data-driven thing. This quant and qualitative data that I'm collecting. But
one thing that's just come to my head, because I was in a sprint planning this morning. As a CTO, what's your opinion on estimating work?
I don't really like it, but it's very often a necessary evil. I think that it's wildly wrong a lot of the time in a lot of organizations. And that is because a lot of people don't really know what they want until they start building it, which is why it's very important to ship early, ship often.
Yeah.
If I had my way and the world was perfect, we would do no estimates for anything. That's obviously not the world that we live in. People want estimates, they want dates, pretty much. If there's a fantastic video, but also very controversial video by Alan Holub, in which he talks about estimation. He basically says, if people are insistent on estimation, you should have every single story as a 1-point story. And then you can say, in this time, we can do 10. I would do that as much as possible. However, the trade-off there is usually to get to that point, there's a lot of what I would call waste to break a story down into what could be described as ones.
Yeah. And what does a one, just one?
A one could be add in let's just say you've got a contact form on a website, add in a field to a contact form. Right, that's a one. Just really everything. So easy.
I see what you mean. So break it down small enough. So I see what you mean now.
Yeah. However, the process to get to that and how granular you have to get
it's a lot of work,
is a lot of work. So therefore it's waste, because all of that time you're spent doing that, you could be actually delivering something to a customer. Yeah. So yeah, it's a very contentious issue. I don't really like to talk about estimates that much because it's quite it's a strongly held belief.
Yeah. But I just think it's, like I said, most of the people who've been on here have been from not one side of the Venn, but a different side of the Venn diagram, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm intrigued. And again, something else, I'm just using you as therapy now. Something else that came up this morning is raising bugs in a sprint. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a bug or an incomplete product backlog item? So the development's been done. Someone's going to test it. They found something. As a CTO again, would you think that's an incomplete story because the tester's done their job, or is that a bug?
I would I would give the most CTO answer and say it depends.
It depends, but
so if it's just from a sprint perspective, if it's an item in the sprint and it's a bug related to an item within that sprint, I would say that it's not a bug and the story is not being properly completed.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I would drag it back to do or whatever.
Yeah.
If it's not related to anything within the sprint and it's a genuine bug, then you have to prioritize it based on
in production.
Exactly.
You know who you are. Listen to Mark.
Yes. And that happens all of the time. So you will see people kind of you would that's a constant battle, isn't it? Kind of what prioritization is the hardest thing. I think I don't envy product owners or managers in terms of prioritization. I think it is a ridiculously hard job to do. I couldn't do it.
What have you got some examples of where it's been done well? Because there's plenty of examples of where people have said it's rubbish, but in terms of how they've gone about it, being on the receiving end of the prioritization, what have the good product managers done?
Yeah, the good ones that I've worked with, very few of them, but they know who they are.
Yeah.
They talk to their customers.
Yeah.
Very and often. They use data-driven decisions, and they don't do what I like to call, and I'm going to trademark this, field of dreams development.
Field of dreams development.
Which is, if we build it, they will come.
Yeah.
With no evidence. Because honestly...
A bit like this podcast, to be honest.
They won't come. Well, they might come. That's not rule everything out. But you should always use, the good kind of product owners and managers that I've worked with always use data, and they always focus on outcomes as well. Can't quite remember the 5 pillars for a product mindset, but those are 3 of them.
Yeah. Google them if you want to find them.
Google.
Do some homework.
Yeah. I've got too many acronyms that I have to remember anyway.
Yeah,
Solid principles.
Oh, they can go do some self-development as well.
Yeah.
So one of the things we sort of pre-chatted about, you might have alluded to it, but why you think having that product mindset is important over a more project-focused sort of way of thinking.
I'm going to relate this directly to, I'm going to tell a story.
Tell us a story.
So about
settling kids.
Tell us
a story.
This is development related, but it's to do with a product mindset. Interestingly enough, I built an audit log in, I think, 3 companies I've worked for. Basically, an audit log is just a record of who's done what within a system and when. So we had a requirement once from one of our customers, which is kind of like, it was an administration portal of sorts. We want to see when Jane does stuff within your system. We want an audit log of that.
Yeah.
So there was a developer on my team who will remain nameless.
Yeah.
Who kind of said, I know what to do. What we'll do is we'll intercept all of the writes to the database and we'll put each individual column change from the old value to the new value into this new audit log table, and we'll show that to the customer. Yeah. That's how to do it technically. That's how to audit every single column change within a database. Totally fine technical approach. But that's absolutely not what the user wanted.
No.
What the user wanted was Jane's changed this configuration over here. Didn't need it that granular. They didn't want that. And I think the product mindset of that, from a development point of view, isn't how can I solve that? It's actually, you need to flip it and be more like, what does that customer actually want?
Yeah.
And also feel free in yourself to kind of challenge that and say, what we're doing doesn't really make any sense to me as a user of that product. Put yourself in the user's shoes. Don't put yourself in the developer's shoes and immediately start like whipping up your IDE and trying to code a solution, which is so common in our industry. Think about, I'm trying to solve a problem here. Forget about being a developer. Forget everything you know about development. How would you do that? And don't think about code last. Even to the point of, and this again doesn't really kind of touch the majority of developers, think about everything you can do to solve an issue before writing code, and have writing code as your last grasp at trying to solve that issue. So things like buy over build, things like, can I solve this infrastructurally? Can I solve this via a process? That to me is a product mindset from as a developer.
Is that where, so what are your thoughts on things like user stories and jobs to be done? And is that something you use for necessary evil, unnecessary evil?
I think they're a necessary evil. I don't think owning a bit of a user story or a subtask or even an entire user story and saying, oh, that bit's the technical bit, that's mine. I think that everybody in a delivery team, and that includes stakeholders, even pre-sales, if you've got pre-sales, I think everybody should want that story to move right, to done. Everybody should feel a certain amount of ownership for that story. It's not just about, I'm a developer in my box and I just want to write code.
It goes back to that point before, hasn't it? Not been put in a box.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that even, like some of the best people I've ever worked with are so, appear to be relatively content to wear different people's hats. I've worked with a product owner who was legitimately involved in the QA process for our product, which sounds insane. He was like, oh yeah, I'll test that because he cares.
It's true product ownership, really, isn't it?
Exactly. So I like to kind of reciprocate that same behavior. So
it can be done.
It can be done. And this mentality can be taught. I'm living proof that it's a mentality that you can gain.
As long as it's not forced.
As long as it's not forced, yes. But you can switch. People change. I think I'm leaning. I'm still really technical. Let's not do myself as the service there. But I think a lot of the things that kind of interest me now are honestly product related and delivery related, and increasingly so. People do change. Let's not get into that though.
I know you came with some notes. Is there anything that I should have asked you, which I haven't, or are there any topics that you feel particularly, passionate about that I haven't covered just yet?
Yeah, I suppose the only thing that I would say is, if you've got the right mentality, exiting a startup is an unmatched feeling. Now I'm not taking credit for that at all. I was the most senior technical person in the company. People did far more work than me in terms of hours on sheets. The co-founders, I don't even know how they're still alive. Like the amount of effort, tears probably. Did I cry? Don't think I cried. I was definitely close. I was definitely close at times.
It's a safe space.
It's the most unmatched feeling. I've never, to have something that you truly care about and exit it and have it integrated into a massive, it was a public company at the time, Medallia. A massive company is probably the proudest thing I've ever done in my life. And I think once you experience that, you'll never stop chasing that high. But yeah, I would encourage anybody who's nodding along that kind of thinks like me to give it a go. Again, in your perfect world, do you think any aspiring
and software engineer, coder, QA, design, do you think everyone should at least try and work in a startup
Yes.
instead of going to the big
Yeah.
corporate straight away?
Yeah, I think even if you decide that it's not for you, it's still worth it. I think I'm a man who likes to try things, apart from skydiving, scared of heights.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I think that everyone should try it. I think it exposes you to so much more than a big corporate. I think that being in a big corporate exposes you to a lot of stuff that you'd never experience in a startup as well, to be fair.
Not all good though.
Yeah, not all good. A lot of mandatory training for some reason in big corps, which I totally understand. Anti-corruption stuff and whatnot, which is very interesting. But I would strongly recommend at some point in someone's career, you should experience a startup. I would probably get a few years under your belt in a non-startup, because you will be thrown into the deep end. I've worked for multiple startups. I've never worked for one in which I immediately know what I'm doing. I basically don't know what I'm doing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I've only learned that that's okay with experience and age. But I think you need a few years in the industry, but I would encourage everybody to have a little go in a startup. But don't use me as an excuse for resignation.
No. Where'd you go? Like, is it just network building? Is it just looking out for specific people? Like, I don't know. If I'm a developer starting off relatively younger than us, where would I go?
There are accelerators.
Okay, yeah.
So one local to me is Baltic Ventures.
Oh yeah, you've been to the Baltic Triangle.
Yes.
The food place.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good there, isn't it?
I used to work in the Baltic Triangle.
Oh.
That's where LivingLens was. But there are accelerators all around the country. I feel incredibly fortunate to have had the experience that I had. I think I started a graduate scheme in Yodel. I think that those opportunities are closing because of AI. I think that's the worst thing about AI is there's a lack of junior engineers being afforded chances like I've got to kind of get a foot in the door.
Do you think it's going to have a massive difference? Or are you seeing the impacts of that already?
I'm seeing the impact already. As you know, we had the COVID boom of hiring a lot of boot camp engineers, kind of doing 8-week courses, 16-week courses to get into tech, and then just being made redundant. With the contraction of the market. I do worry about the state of things in future, especially for junior engineers. But in terms of networking for a startup, look at accelerators. If you're fortunate enough, and I've actually done it before, try and get a placement. If you can afford it, try and get an intern placement, even if it's for a few weeks, just to say, yes, I've worked here, and I've worked on production code, because working on like a university project is nothing like production code. Like, there's various different considerations, like running code in production. You've got to make various considerations for code working in production over, just some uni project that you're running on your own laptop. But yeah, I think it's not just me who's echoing that sentiment. Like, pretty much everybody I speak to who's involved in management and tech is very worried about the future for junior engineers. I think there's going to be a cliff where you've got your senior engineers who you're just going to have senior engineers in 5 to 10 years time. I'm pretty worried about it. Because what happens when we die?
yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah.
I can't end on that.
Don't end on that.
What are you thinking? What's the answer? Is it just more understanding? Is it? Yeah. What's the?
I think the answer is to just be a bit braver and taking chances on people, particularly when they show an aptitude to learning. Great example. If you're from a technical point of view again, but if you're a great engineer, I don't really think that frameworks and languages and all of that make that much difference. I think that a decent engineer can pick up a new language pretty quickly, particularly if it's, so I by trade am a C#. engineer, I suppose, I could probably switch to Java and be relatively comfortable within a week.
Yeah.
And that's true for people who have got 0 years experience in the industry. If you've been to university, you know how to write code. I think the only real difference is kind of your low-level languages, which are significantly harder. So like C, where you're doing things like memory management, that is actually much harder than the kind of high-level languages like Java and C#, or Python. But those are pretty interchangeable. I've actually done that relatively recently myself. But yeah, take a punt on people. Don't marry yourself to frameworks. Marry yourself to the individual and their aptitude to learning and what they are like as a person.
Okay. Where can people reach out if you are open to that? If not, then say I'm not open to it. But where do you hang out?
So I do spend a little bit of time on LinkedIn, mostly disagreeing with people. That's not true. So LinkedIn's a great vehicle. I'm open to mentoring, looking at CVs. Done mentoring before in the past. Happy to give mock interviews, particularly obviously to junior engineers.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. I've got some side projects that I work on which aren't public, so I can't plug them.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, that's pretty much where I spend most of my professional time.
Mm-hmm. On that note, what an episode. I've learned a lot. I know other people will have. Thanks for taking the time
No worries.
to come on. Cheers, Mark.
Cheers.